Good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm going to rearrange this for 1 second. I'm going to pull this back. The line had slowly come to a halt. Stretching around the inside of the church were hundreds of people who had come to this holy place of worship to pay their respects to a 16-year-old young man. Outside in the street corner on the cold, crisp Chicago autumn day stood a group of Muslims from the nation awaiting for the minister to arrive. Inside this old, rundown, yet beautiful cathedral, I sat 10 rows back for hours, watching old people, young people, families, wheelchair-bound babies, wheelchair-bound seniors, and crying babies come and go. Some would stop, others would cross themselves, others unable to even look. But at some point, they would move on. But then the line stopped. Somebody wasn't able to move on. Someone didn't care about the Muslims taking their position as Minister Farrakhan walked into this cathedral. Someone needed time. And nobody said a word. We all just watched. We watched this precious, beautiful 8-year-old angel stand over her cousin's open casket and hug him like she will never see him again. We watched her father, dressed in a long black t-shirt with his Jesus gold medallion waving from his chest, stand next to her, staring at the ceiling and clutching his daughter in pain. We just sat and watched and pretended we were not in the room so this beautiful child of God could have one last moment with her cousin. She kissed him on the forehead and she clutched him. She clutched her daddy as tight as she knew how. And she slowly walked down the aisle. As I turned around to witness this powerful exit of this little girl, we all rose to our feet as the family of this young man was entering the church, and we stood motionless as they walked down the aisle. And as the mother of the 16-year-old had said to me the previous Wednesday, she could now put her baby to rest. I wrote that piece after I was sent a video in 2009. I had just taken the position as editor-in-chief of GlobalGrind.com, which was a website run by Russell Simmons. He'd asked me to be his political director. And in June of 2009, if you remember, there was the beginning of the Arab Spring. It just sort of begun in Iran, was sort of the first place that we started to see young people organize against their government. And we saw a video in June of this young girl named Neda on YouTube, and she was killed. And we watched her die right before our eyes on YouTube. And even the president, if Marlon is still here, the president was asked this question in the Rose Garden, and even he said that his compassion and his heart and his thoughts were with the young people in Iran. And just 3 months later, I sent a YouTube cell phone video. And someone said, this young man, FM in Chicago, was killed. And could you at least help us get the word out about his death? This was a shot of the video. This young man was in a schoolyard fight. After school, and he was walking through the fight trying to get home, and someone picked up a 2x4 and hit him over the head, and they beat him to death with a 2x4. And it reminded me of a conversation that I had with then Mayor Cory Booker, now Senator Cory Booker, about what happens when black kids die or when Latino kids die. What happens when, as we discussed last night, what happens when in the urban communities, when we have death after death after death, they just become a number or a statistic or page A37 if they're lucky to get in the newspaper. And this family called me and said, can you just help us get his name out there? Where's Marquand? Right? Stories. 28 of your friends and family, you know stories. And I thought Cory Booker said, but what happens when white kids die? And this is in no disrespect, because for anyone who's wondering, I'm white. Right? So let's get that out of the way. Right? So if anyone, this is in no disrespect to the families, white families who have lost their children, who have lost a loved one to violence, but this young lady was killed over a decade ago, Natalie Holloway. We know her name. This beautiful young child was killed over 2 decades ago, John Benet Ramsey. Part of the American vocabulary. This young man, for my friends from New York, was killed over 3 decades ago, Elon Potts, and just last year, they found his remains, they made an arrest, and he was on the cover of our papers in New York City for weeks. But when black kids are killed, or Latino kids are killed, we don't even know their names. He has a name, Darion Albert. This is the young man who was killed in Chicago. We created a campaign. Who here is on Twitter now? Who here was on Twitter in 2013? 2012, keep your hands up. 2011. You can put it down, it's okay. 2010. 2009. 2008. The inventor of Twitter is here. Thank you so much for coming. So as you can see, in 2009, and again, not to disrespect my friends in the hip-hop business, but Erica Ford, we know our dear friends from New York. There weren't, Kanye wasn't on Twitter, and Jay wasn't on Twitter, and Rihanna wasn't on Twitter. And so there weren't these huge, international celebrities on Twitter. There's a lot of like Fabulous and Jim Jones, who we love, but they don't have that huge mass reach. And so we called some of our friends and we said, could you tweet out, he has a name, Darion Albert, simple. And can we get this young man's name to trend? In 6 hours we did. And Marlon, the White House called in 2009 and said, what can we do to be involved? And we said, can the president go to Chicago? That's 2009. We're talking about Chicago just happened, the violence just started happening last year, the year before, that's 2009. And the president sent Attorney General Eric Holder and the Secretary of Education, Arnie Duncan, and they had a very important conversation that has led to a very important initiative from the president on youth violence. I came home from that funeral, and this incredible woman who you heard speak last night, who's become a very dear friend of mine, Erica Ford, called me that night, Saturday night. I was sitting in my house. There was that record. I was trying to write a blog about the funeral, and there was a record, Pretty Wings Are Pretty, that Maxwell record, right, a pretty-ass record. And I kept listening to that record over and over and over again, and I was trying to write to this record, and then Erica calls, and Erica's like, can you do a He Has a Name for a young kid who was killed in Queens? The mother has asked, can you come to Queens tomorrow and sit with the mother in her home? So Erica and I went out to Queens. He has a name, Kevin Miller. Kevin was walking home from school that Friday afternoon. Darion was buried on Saturday. That Friday afternoon, Kevin was walking home from school, and 2 kids got in a shootout. They missed. Kevin was a block away, hit him in the back of the head, 1 bullet, dead, 13 years old, gone. Didn't even see the bullet coming. Family started calling and emailing and said, can you do a story about our children, Marquand's stories, telling our stories? And I was just the vehicle or the vessel to get the story out there because we had this website and Russell was supportive of this initiative. She has a name, Ayanna Jones. Who here is from Detroit? Anybody from Detroit? Detroit. Ayanna Jones. Ayanna Jones was asleep. In the front couch of her house with her grandmother, cuddled in her grandmother's arms. They're looking for somebody who had killed somebody. They thought that guy was in the upstairs apartment. Ayanna lived in the downstairs apartment. They went to the wrong house. The police being followed by, who watches that show, First 48? Anyone see that show, First 48? Followed by those cameras from First 48. At 12:30 in the morning, they throw a stun grenade through the window of the bottom house onto the couch where Grandma and Ayanna are sleeping. Grandma jumps up. What's going on? Please come to the door. Pop! Shoot. Put one bullet in her head. She's killed. Dead. The trial just went through the courthouse this past May. Mistrial. Hung jury. Like we just saw this past weekend. The cop is back on the police force. For years, we did story after story, Marquand after story, telling our stories. After story, hundreds of them. After story, he has a name, and she has a name, and he has a name. And then, this is Heaven Sutton, Chicago, 7-year-old Heaven Sutton, selling candy outside of her house, was shot and killed. This young man was killed February 26, 2012. We did a story, he has a name, Trayvon Martin, like we had done hundreds of times before. But somehow, some way, something was different about this one. Something felt like something was really wrong with the way the police were handling the case, with the way that the guy had gotten off in these new laws that we didn't really know what they were, called Stand Your Ground. And the conversation at that time was just being sort of spoken about in the media from black members of the media. Don Lemon and Melissa Harris Perry and Charles Blow from the New York Times and Jonathan Capehart from the Washington Post. Amazing journalists, but white people, we didn't know how to get in this conversation. And to Jamira's question from yesterday, and Sarah, your response, how do we build this idea that when black children are killed and white children are killed, how do we have these conversations together? Because this is the most diverse room I've seen speaking on this issue. So how do we have these conversations together? So as a white person, I said, what can I do to get into this conversation, to push the conversation forward? So I wrote a blog called Dear White People, You Will Never Look Suspicious Like Trayvon Martin. And I wanted to talk about my privilege as a white person, as a man, as an American, as someone who's straight. I want to talk about the idea that I could walk down the street and put my hand out for a taxi and it always would stop for me. That I can walk into a restaurant and nobody will ever ask me to pay before I eat. That I can walk down the street and no lady will ever grab her purse as she walks by me. And I can walk through my neighborhood in Brooklyn with a hoodie on and a pair of jeans and some Timbs, and no one's going to ask me for my papers as if I didn't belong there, like George Zimmerman did to Trayvon Martin that fatal night in February in Sanford, Florida. So I wrote that piece, and we started to talk about this case, and then all of a sudden we knew his name. People started knowing his name, and then this happened. Aurora. Who here is from Colorado? Who here is from Aurora?
I work for somebody.
This happened, July 20th, 2012. And this nation was brought to its knees in a gigantic mass shooting. And then this happened, August 5th, 2000. And who here is from Wisconsin? August 5th, 2012, the Sikh temple. And the conversation continued, and this young man was killed November 23rd, 2012. And the family called me and said, can you do a story? He has a name, Jordan Davis. And as most of us witnessed this past weekend, this case went to trial, and we had another hung jury. December 14th, 2012, Sarah, this nation cried with your family. Who here is from Newtown? This nation, we fell to our knees and we cried. My grandfather lives in Newtown. I know the community quite well. And we cried because we never thought that this could happen in our country, but yet as we had witnessed hundreds and thousands of young black and brown children killed, The conversation had already been happening in communities of color. And now when it happened in the white community, we were at a crossroads of how do we work together. This young man is Noah Posner. A lot of people want to talk about Newtown, and for those who live in the community and those who are survivors of that horrific massacre, I want to talk about Newtown in glossy terms. This young man, Noah Posner, is of the Jewish faith, and his mother, like Emmett Till's mother, wanted the governor to look at his body before he was buried. And in the Jewish faith, you put 2 stones in the hands of the deceased. If you go to a Jewish cemetery, you'll see stones on top of the graves as a remembrance that a person has been there to pay their respects. So the mother wanted to put 2 stones in Noah's hands, and she put one in his right hand in his casket, and then she wanted to put one in his left hand, and there was no left hand. The left hand was gone. The mother wanted to show Noah's face to the governor of Connecticut, but Noah's bottom half of his face was gone. This was a massacre. These are 20 beautiful children and 6 incredible adults who were angels, but it was a massacre. And the conversation that has happened since has been about laws, has been about guns. That's part of the reason why we're here. But I also argue often it's gun violence. It's not just about the gun. It's about the violence. As all of you in this room have done incredible work and will continue to do incredible work, I think it's important for us to remember that we have made some progress. The 2 people to the right of the First Lady of the United States of America, Michelle Obama, the State of the Union address of the President of the United States of America, are the mother and father of Hadiya Pendleton. Hadiya was killed just a few weeks after marching in this town for the inauguration for the President of this country. She was shot in the back and murdered. The 2 men who are on trial. But the significance of this moment, as the President in this address discussed the idea of passing new laws, he recognized for the first time, really in this country, that the pain of black families who have lost their children is equal to the pain of white families. So as families from Newtown and the Sikh Temple and Aurora sat in the First Lady's box, the President said, Hadiya's parents are going through that same pain. And if anything we could take away from that moment was, Marquand, we know names. And when we know names, we know families. And when we know families, we know faces. And when we know faces, we know humanity. So as we go back to our communities, the least we could do in the memory of Darian, in the memory of Kevin, in the memory of Ayanna, in the memory of Ramarley, in the memory of Oscar, in the memory of those 20 beautiful children in Newtown, in the memory of those who lost their lives in that movie theater in Aurora, in the memory of Trayvon, and in the memory of Jordan Davis, the least we could do is ask our friends, our family, our neighbors, our classmates, just to remember the names. But I know that in this room, we can do more than that. So I urge you and challenge you with every ounce of energy you have. Fight with every tooth and nail and scratch that you can give. When you go back to your communities, let us not just fight for the dignity and humanity of our young people and our friends in their death. Let us fight for the dignity and humanity of our friends in their life. I thank you for your time. and I thank you for your attention. I now get to introduce my good friend, who's also Marlon's good friend. This dear, dear friend of mine has also worked for the president of this country. He worked in the White House as the director of outreach for the president for the African American community. He was the deputy director on the 2012 campaign for their voting operations. He has since returned home to his hometown of New York City, and we're happy to have him back. My dear friend, Michael Blake.
What's going on, everybody? Get some energy. What's going on, everybody? First, show some love to Skolnik right now. This is this is family right here. Skolnik's like my brother. I haven't seen Mateo yet. I'm a little upset right now that I haven't seen my little nephew. That we had a holiday dinner. I turned around. I was like, "Where's Mateo?" Skolnik's like, "Oh, Mateo just took over your bedroom." I was like, "Okay, cool, great." That's the kind of relationship we have right here, and I really need people to understand. From Michael, Erica, the other in the crew who's not here, Tamika Mallory. You have folks in the movement right now that are fighting for us every single day, even when the cameras are not on, and we have to have their back in this journey right now. So this is real personal for me. I'm from the Bronx, New York. Anybody from New York in the room? There we go. See, when there's folks in New York, they're going to let you know. And look, I think we are all sick and tired of having to keep going through this pain, right? We would want to be able to have summits where we're not talking about the lost ones anymore. And for those of us that were back home in the Bronx just a few weeks ago for the 2-year anniversary of Ramley Graham and the pain that was there, looking at the families that were there and how many of them were there, we got to do something different. So the purpose of us right now is to talk about how we organize and how we move this forward. And let's just get past the conferences and the summits, but let's go do something, For those who can't see my shirt in the back, and I know I was not asked to wear this. I did this by choice. Can y'all see what that says? What does it say? It says stand up, please. What does it say? See, y'all sounding real quiet. What does it say? Vote like your life depends on it. Couldn't hear that. Vote like your life depends on it. So we talking about this conversation on gun violence and work. We're talking about life. We're talking about the necessity of us doing something right now. And you think about the impact of what's happening in a lot of these conversations. It happened because we didn't vote like our life depended on it, because we allowed for legislators to be there to allow for a stand your ground to get there in the first place, which is allowing for people to get off. And if we only show up when there's presidential elections, we don't show up when there's more work to be done, then we're going to be wondering what happened, right? So I got to ask this first question to my brother. We're going to have just a conversation here. We're going to go back and forth. And he alluded to it. Now, you can clearly tell I'm black. There's no question about that, Why does someone who is white care so much about people of color losing their lives?
I think this, again, this is such a diverse room, and some of us I have no personal experience with violence. I've lost, no close friends, no family members to violence, thankfully. But I think as we progress in life, we realize, for those of us who do have privilege, because of the color of our skin, forget economic background or forget education, just the color, just the when we came out the womb. For those of us who have privilege, I think there's a point that some of us want to challenge ourselves. What are you going to do with that privilege? And so when we see things like the cliche of, taxi cabs passing people by, or we see things like white men, asking black children, what are you doing in my neighborhood? Or we walk into office buildings and no one ever asks us, what are we doing there? Like, excuse me, sir, how can we help you? You start to realize that the rights that you take for granted are worthless unless you fight for those same rights for others. So if I have those rights and I hold on to them and I don't do anything for anybody else, I'm an asshole. Excuse my language, Cap, but I think, for those who are under 18, I didn't say that.
It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
Right? If I just, and we know people like that. We have friends in high school and college who are like that, who just want to go make a lot of money and sit in their money and count their money and buy big things. And then they get really lonely and they call us and was like, well, when can we hang out? Because the lives that we live are much more engaging and interesting because we're giving. All of us in this room, not saying my life, but all of us in this room, because we're giving a piece of us to somebody else. And that, for me at least, Michael, is what I wanted my life to be. So when I see, or when I saw as growing up, so many young black and Latino kids dying, and then as white people, we were just like, oh, it ain't our problem. We don't have to drive to the south side of Chicago. We don't gotta go through, the Bronx, unless we go to Yankee Stadium, where we just go in and get out. But it is our problem because Trayvon Martin is not a black child, he's an American child. Jordan Davis was killed on his own soil. He's an American child. He was raised in this country. He was born in this country. He was educated by this country. He's an American child. And we hear his parents saying that language on TV now. So I'm an American child, he's an American child. I have to fight for him. And we know, and last thing I say, we know, let us be realists. We know that tonight someone's going to get killed somewhere in America. I don't want to sound like Jay and Kanye on Watch the Throne, but somewhere in America, someone's going to get shot tonight. A lot of people are going to get shot tonight. So I've come to and I think for a lot of us, it's painful because we can't stop it. I think Erica said this yesterday. We can't stop it. I have come to the belief and agreement with myself. I just was in a cab ride here, and the guy, he was Ethiopian, and he was telling me he's training for marathons. And he runs a minute 7, an hour 7 half marathon. Hour 7. And I've come to a belief in my life that we're running marathons, and it's okay if we don't finish, as long as we keep running. It's okay in our lifetime if we don't see the end to our fight, as long as we keep running. So I don't know if I'm going to finish the marathon, but I'm content and I'm okay with at least giving it my best to get to the finish line.
So we think about, giving our best and going through this fight right now. I think there are a lot of us that were hopeful with the Jordan Davis case of like, all right, this has to happen, right? Like, how much more obvious could it be that this has to happen? And then it still doesn't, right? And Skolnik wrote this amazing public apology to the parents of Jordan Davis, and there's two lines here that really resonate on how we kind of keep this momentum going that really hit home. First was, we are embarrassed by the consequences of our lack of participation in the political process that has allowed laws to be passed that encourage the citizens of this nation to shoot first and get asked no questions later. And then, as the organizer in me, and talking about the attorney, your champion, your advocate, your chief counsel, Mr. John Phillips, deserves an apology as well, as he pounded the drum loudly without nearly enough majors in his drum line. So when we talk about where we're going to go from here, the real question is, how are we going to organize our communities to go do something, right? And not just organize when the crisis happens. It's real easy to organize when someone gets shot, right? But the reality is there's going to be a day or 2 or 3 days after that where it's going to get real quiet. And people are going to they're not going to be paying attention anymore, and they're not going to care anymore. And you have to figure out how and where and why you quite frankly, give a damn about this, because you can't keep allowing lives to be lost without someone doing something about this, There's a lot of folks who are doing a lot of amazing work, and one line that really stuck with us when we think about organizing in 2012, Governor Patrick in Massachusetts would say this to us all the time. In 2008, we changed the guard. In 2012, we guard the change. And how do you guard the change? You got to keep working. You got to keep building. You got to keep fighting for this. You got to make a real clear understanding that I'm not going to sit here quietly and just hope something changes. Right? Now, if there wasn't something major going on, now let's just be honest right now. How many of you would actually be interested in voting this year in a midterm election? Okay. Say we got about 60, 65%. If it was a presidential year, how many of y'all be voting? That's the first problem right there. We're the organizers, we're the leaders, and we're not even having our hands up on going and having our voices heard all the time. But yeah, we're wondering why other people aren't showing up right now. So one thing that I've seen, and we'll love to get your thoughts on as well, how do you keep the momentum going even when it's quiet? How do you get folks to be constantly thinking about the need to organize and mobilize? Now, I know we've been shouting her out a lot because we need to. What Erica's doing out in Queens is showing folks like you can actually make it. You can have a shot by consistently being organized and mobilizing. I'm going to get you a job. See, this is personal for me. I got 2 brothers who are locked up and turned their lives around. One of which, and I will never forget the day, got locked up because they said he had a burglary tool in his car, and when they opened the trunk, it was a plunger. Right? So when you think about why you have to keep mobilizing, if you stay quiet, you're going to have more people that get lost behind that. So one thing we said is, how do you create job training and skills for those young brothers and sisters out in the community so they don't have idle summers? That's what's happening to many of our communities. It's not just about educating the cops, it's about educating the communities of how do I keep you engaged? I can make sure the cop is involved. That's nice and all. That's encouraging and all. But if my community is not invested, it does not matter. So how do we start that process right now of getting our communities more engaged and getting them serious about this?
One thing I've been thinking about a lot, and I think it's important as you all go about the next 2 days of this conference, is, I was in Jacksonville, during the last days of the trial, during the verdict and the last days of the trial. And that's quite fresh in our minds of what just happened this past weekend in Jacksonville. And I was with Lucy and Ron, Jordan's parents, in New York the past 3 days when they were just in town. I think everybody in this room has come into this conversation with their own passion and with their own set of experiences. And as we break up into groups and as we start exploring the different issues that are happening, let us not get lost in one. Let us not get lost in stand your ground laws because that is what's on our minds today. Or let us not get lost in mass shootings, because that's what happened 2 weeks ago. Or just yesterday, there was another potential, there was a hoax at a high school. But let us have a conversation that all of us can be part of. That all of us can bring our own experiences and our own passions and our own interests in this conversation to the table. So some may be interested in background checks. Some may be interested in mentorship programs. Some may be interested in violence prevention and intervention. Some may be interested in stand your ground laws. Everything that you bring to the table is important. Everything in this room. Every passion that you have on this issue is important to solving this problem. There is no, as the president said in the State of the Union, they deserve a vote, and Aurora deserves a vote, and Newtown deserves a vote, and Wisconsin deserves a vote. That vote that we got, and I agree with Colin yesterday, that vote, it was important that we got the vote, but we all are not dumb. That vote was not going to stop gun violence in this country. That vote might have been one step towards that process, but there's a lot more votes and a lot more things we need to do to get to the end of this marathon. So even if we got that vote and we passed that background check law, we still would have a lot of work to do during those downtimes. So as you come to this conversation, don't think that if you're not excited about ending stand your ground laws because that's what just happened Saturday, that your passion is not as important as some of the dream defenders from the room who are doing that work. Everybody's commitment to this issue is important to this conversation. But I want to ask my friend Michael for a moment, because we're talking about voting and we're talking about off the years. You came home to New York for a very specific reason, because you felt that you need to be part of the political process, in the political process of those who do make the votes to make more effective change. And now you're running for office in New York State. Why did you? And full disclosure, I am a supporter of his campaign. So why did you decide to do that?
Well, you know, put this into context. First, you got to make this personal for you. Like, we keep throwing out these stats and these lines. Like, you got to make this real personal. And for me, I grew up in the South Bronx. The congressional district I live in, poorest congressional district in the country. You know, gun violence is happening all the time. You know, we don't need a press conference for someone to tell us about gun violence. You know, I don't need that. You know, I can go down the block and go talk to Brother Hakeem at Save Our Streets, and he says it's real simple. If you give a brother a check, you give him an opportunity to go to school, he's probably not picking up a gun. You know, and so for me, I couldn't sit on the sidelines anymore. You know, there is something about being a part of the process and organizing and mobilizing, but I really do believe that when there are people that are committed to the cause, who understand the cause, who actually are going to be the face of the cause, you will mobilize more people to be a part of the cause. Like, I don't need someone to try to rap to me about, is it important to get involved? I don't need that. But I do know that there is someone else who does need that, right? The one thing that we were told all the time in Iowa during the caucus was organize yourself out of a job. And the whole mindset was, how do you keep building this to the point where it's not about you? And maybe your personal story can inspire somebody to go do some more, but it gets so big that you can't see the number. Like, it becomes so massive that you can't see the number. And so for me, I'm sick and tired of folks talking about the Bronx like it's a negative thing. I'm tired of folks looking at folks on my block and being surprised that you make it. You know, that can't be the reality anymore. You know, it can't be expected that you presume someone's going to lose their life before they're going to graduate from school. So for me, I'm in this and fully involved and fully invested, and want for us to be a part of this process, because we have the ability to really change the course in our lives if we're serious about this, right? For me, I don't believe there's any greater way to move the needle than through politics. You know, you elect people and they change the course of your lives, period. So why would I not want to be a part of that process and be a part of a process trying to inspire more folks to be a part of that as well? The last reason why I decided to do this, you know, the president, you know, I've been very fortunate. I've known the president since 2006, and the first thing he said to me was, dream big dreams. And even, you know, years down the line, when we came back around, you know, the day after the re-elect in 2012, when you saw that the president, you know, was tearing up in the campaign office, you know, the full story there was, he said, I did all this work over these years with the hope and expectation that there would be so many of you who wanted to get involved. And he saw that crystallize right in front of his eyes. And so how would it be for me to have these opportunities and then not say to the people of the Bronx and the people of New York and people of our country that I'm not going to find a way to give back to you so that we can have a better shot at this? When we start caring about the lives of someone's name that you don't know the same way you care about the lives of your family, that's when real change will happen. So we got less than 5. You know, I'm an organizer. I'm paying attention when y'all telling me right now, you know. We want to talk about the tactics and how to make this real and how to make this practical. You know, one thing we would say all the time, you know, determine your end goal and then work backward, right? Like, a lot of times you would be doing this work and you could just be working. Like, look, we're all organizers. We all are part of the movement, but we're all busy. And so you have to be very tactical with your approach. So like, what's the end goal? And then we're gonna work backwards from here. If we want to say we're gonna change stand your ground laws, well, let's be very tactical. Do you have the votes to get those legislators to move those stand your ground laws? Right? You want to make some awareness on your campus. Okay, how are we going to mobilize in that real way and then move backwards from that to mobilize my campus? So first, what is the end goal and end goals you're trying to get done? That's the first thing. Second thing, what's the vision that you're actually trying to create, right? Like, okay, you pass stand your ground, let's say, and you get it repealed, rather. Well, then what? Like, why are we trying to do this? People are not inspired to go and get involved just because. They're inspired because of a bigger cause. And so how do you get them to think about that bigger cause? You are not going to stop someone getting shot tonight. No one in this room is going to do that. But what you can do is inspire someone to make an active decision to not pull the trigger. That's what you can potentially do. So, to Skolnik, how do we continue this organizing mindset to get people actively involved?
I think, where's Mary Pat? Mary Pat, I've known Mary Pat since you were 12, I think. And I listened to you last night, and Sarah, I listened to you last night, and Sarah, you're 17. Two of you are heroes of mine. Now, I see you on TV, Sarah. I see you on Twitter. Mary Pat, I've known you since you were 12, and you're heroes of mine. And I think that who here is under 30? Damn. Who here is over 30?
Whoa.
Okay. I didn't know that. That's great.
My knees hurt just sitting here.
My back aches. Damn. I'm still on MySpace.
I still have a Hotmail email.
So I will end my remarks with this. There are people in this room that folks my age and older don't believe in. But I believe in. And I know that I look up there, I see at our names, I see pound sign, hashtag, I see all kinds of things, right? We invented that. Right? Like, we invented Twitter, we invented Facebook, we even invented MySpace, we invented YouTube. We invented these tools that are communication tools that are really changing. And we're watching what's happening in Kiev and in Venezuela and in Thailand right now through social media. I'm not watching CNN. I'm watching it on Twitter. I'm watching it real time happening before my eyes. When a young person gets killed, I get a tweet by saying, hey, can you do it? He has a name. My cousin was just shot last night. I don't see it on television. So what's in this room, don't let anyone tell you, Mary Pat or Sarah, you're too young. Because they're too old. Right? So don't let anyone tell you that in this room that you can't, reduce gun violence in your community by 50% in your lifetime, or 75 or 90% in your lifetime. Because it will be the people in this room who will do that. And that's why I came. My child's been up since 3 o'clock this morning. I got a 1-year-old baby. I've been up since 3 o'clock. I would love to be in my hotel room, asleep right now, resting, because this is every night. But I want to be in this room because I know what Michael's talking about, those tactical moves, that strategy is going to be made and happen in this room and then be actualized when you go back to your communities. And I want to learn and I want to listen. So I'm incredibly inspired. I mean, Emily said to me last night before I left, what do you think? How do you think this is going? The folks who are in this room, this is like a who's who of my favorite organizers in the country. I mean, the Gen Y Not folks are here. The Newtown folks are here. the Dream Defenders are here. Right? And there's a lot of folks who are here who I don't know who I want to meet. So believe that you can do it because you're already doing it. And if folks tell you you're too young, tell them to follow you on Twitter.
This is the last thing I would say. Look, this is a continual movement, and you have to appreciate this. When folks talk about, civil rights movement, you got to really put it into context. It took 9 years for a bill to finally get done. Like substantive, real change in between. A lot of lives got lost, a lot of names that were forgotten about. It wasn't just a one-time thing. You know, 55 to 64, a lot of things had to happen to get there. So this is a continual process. For anyone that tells you you can't achieve anything and it's not possible and that it's going to be too hard, I said this to a group last night. A bunch of us were organizing in New York City. SCIU 1199 organized all the parents of the victims who were lost. And I said, if a black guy from the Bronx can go to Iowa and get a black man elected president, anything is possible, right? And so when you think about what it is, my favorite book is a book by Jim Wallace called God's Politics. And the last line of it is, we are the ones we've been waiting for. So as we move from this space and we get convened and we do some things from here, we are the ones that can organize. We are the ones that can mobilize. We are the ones that can change the world. But it starts by what we're going to do in our communities. And because of all that, because of you, because of everything that's about to happen, on behalf of all of us, we say thank you.